What's up everyone, my name's Dave, and today I'm going to show you how I made this keepsake box for my son using finger joints. The box is going to be made from 3/4 inch sapelli, and I'll start by marking out all the parts. I'll start by cutting all the boards to the rough dimensions using my table saw sled. Then I'll cut all the boards to their final width and height using the fence at the table saw. The box is going to be made using finger joints or box joints, and I'll have to make a quick jig for that. So I'll start by cutting the scrap board here to a 1/2 inch thick strip, actually just a little bit thicker than a 1/2 inch. I'm going to make the joints using my table saw, so here I'm changing out my table saw blade for a dado stack. I'll use a combination of dado blades and spacers to get as close to a 1/2 inch thick as I can. The height of the dado is going to be set just a bit taller than the thickness of one of the sides of the box. I made this quick easy finger joint jig just using my miter fence from the table saw and a scrap piece of 2x material. I'll start by attaching the scrap board to my miter fence using some screws, and then I'll check to make sure it's square to the dado stack. Then I can cut the 1/2 inch dado into the fence I just made. The piece of 1/2 inch scrap that I cut earlier was just a little bit thicker than the dado I just finished cutting, so I'm just shaving a little bit off with my hand plane. Then I'll fit the 1/2 inch scrap board into the dado I made on the fence. The idea is to get a good snug fit. Then I'll mark the piece so that it just about an inch sticks off the fence, take it over to the chop saw, and cut off the waste. I need to save the other half for an operation coming up later. Now I'll glue the 1/2 inch piece into the fence board. After the glue's had some time to dry, I'll head back over to the table saw. I'll first start by removing the screws that held the fence board onto the miter fence. Then I can reposition the fence board to where there's a space between the piece of scrap that I glued into the fence board earlier and the dado stack. The space needs to be the thickness of the dado stack, so I'll use the offcut that I took from the chop saw earlier to space this out. Once I have everything spaced out and into position, I'll screw the fence board back into the miter fence. I'll test out the new jig I made by cutting a couple of scrap boards and seeing how they fit. If the fit's a little bit too tight or too loose, I may have to adjust the fence side to side just a little bit, but most of the time this works out pretty good. There's some videos and some plans for some really fancy finger joint jigs, and I'm sure they work really well with the ability to fine tune and adjust each joint, but this method is quick and easy, and it's always worked well for me. Once I'm confident that the jig's set up properly, I'll go ahead and cut the finger joints on all 4 sides of the box. The bottom of the box is going to be a 1/4 inch piece of plywood that sits in a groove that goes all around all 4 sides. I'll make that groove at the router table using a 1/4 inch straight bit. Routing the 1/4 inch groove on the front and back boards is pretty easy because I can cut the groove all the way through the board. The groove will come out the end between 2 fingers and be covered up by the fingers on the sideboards. On the sideboards, I'll have to plunge the cut in so that I don't route all the way through the board. This way the groove won't be visible when I assemble the piece. Once I cut the groove in the bottom of the sides, I'll give everything a test fit and make sure that the finger joints fit right and the grooves all line up for the plywood bottom. Once I know everything fits good and lines up right, I can get an accurate measurement of how big the bottom needs to be and go ahead and cut it out at the table saw. Next, I'll sand all the inside parts of the box with 150 grit sandpaper. Sanding them now will make things a lot easier than trying to do it after I have everything assembled. Now I'm ready to start assembling the box. I'll apply glue to all the finger joints and then get everything into position, put the plywood bottom on, and then clamp everything together. I'm always feel a little bit rushed when I do this task. I use Titebond number 3 because that's the glue I had on hand with the longest open time. But in the future, I think I'd like to do this with hide glue or maybe even an epoxy so that I get more time and I don't feel so rushed to get the box put together before the glue dries. Once I have everything glued up and the clamps all in place, I'll go around and check the box to make sure everything's square. Once the glue's dried on the sides, I'm ready to start working on the top of the box. I'll start by taking my hand plane and flushing up all the sides with each other. This way I'll make sure that the top has a nice solid fit to the sides with no gaps. The lid of the box is going to have a small recess or shoulder that goes around the bottom side of it so that it actually slides down into the sides of the box. This will give me just a little bit more glue surface when I glue everything up. Once I cut the shoulder on the top, I can apply some glue and clamp the top down to the sides. After I get the lid clamped down and make sure that there's no gaps, I'll let the glue dry overnight. Once the glue's dried overnight, I'm ready to start flushing the top up to the sides and also lowering or flushing up all the proud finger joints. I'll do this with a low angle block plane and my low angle number 5 plane. Low angle planes work really well for this because they slice through ring grain really easy. Once I'm finished using the hand planes, I'll come in with my random orbital sander and some 150 grit paper and go over the entire box. So after I finished sanding everything smooth, I did notice that I had a few small little gaps in some of the finger joints, and I figured now would be a good time to share this little hack with you guys on how to fill these in and make it look like they were perfectly tight fitting right off of the saw. So the first thing I do to fill these gaps in is to take some wipe-on polyurethane and flood the area of the gaps. Next, I take some 150 grit sandpaper or 220 grit sandpaper and sand with the grain to build a slurry and create some wet sawdust. I might have to reapply some of the polyurethane throughout the process and keep sanding until I slowly fill in all the gaps with this sawdust slurry that I'm creating. So I just keep sanding and reapplying the polyurethane until the gaps are completely gone and you can never tell that they were there in the first place. I would love to say that I get these joints perfect all the time right on the first shot, but that's definitely not me, and I use this trick probably more often than I should. But the results normally turn out really good, and it's easier for me than using sawdust mixed with glue. And once everything's dried, you can sand this down and put whatever finish you were going to put on it anyways, and it looks great. So now that I've cheated at making tight-fitting finger joints, I'm ready to separate the lid from the rest of the box. I'll do this at the table saw by setting the saw up to cut half on one finger and half on another finger. This will make things look pretty even when I'm finished cutting the lid away. I'll start by cutting a kerf in one side or one face of the box, and then I'll add some spacers to fill that kerf in and apply some tape so that they don't move, and then I'll roll the box over to the next side and make another cut, add some spacers, and continue this until I've worked my way around the box and I can separate the lid completely from the body of the box. Once I've separated the lid from the box, I'll use some sandpaper on a sanding block just to clean up any of the saw marks that are left on the lid and on the base of the box. And once everything's sanded down and cleaned up, I'm ready to start applying some finish. For this project, I'm using General Finishes Armor Seal. It is my all-time favorite finish. I love it. It's easy to work with, it's easy to sand between coats and to buff out at the end to get that really silky smooth finish. I'll apply 3 coats of it, and then when I'm finished, I'll let that dry overnight, and then I'll come back the next day with some 4/0 steel wool and some clear brie wax, and I'll buff the whole box out and then wipe it all down, and I get that really nice satin finish across the whole project, and it's silky smooth to the touch. I'll leave links to the finishes and the hardware that I used on this project in the description below in case you want to check them out. I picked up the hardware for this box on Amazon. It came as a kit with the 2 hinges and the front latch, and the finish is antiqued brass. Installation was pretty easy for these hinges. I didn't have to mortise them in or anything, they just sit on the back of the box. So I just installed them like hanging half the hinge over the top ledge of the bottom of the box, and then marked out where the screw locations were going to go, drilled a couple of pilot holes, and then installed the screws. Then I was able to sit the lid of the box on, mark out the holes for the top half of the hinge on the lid. Same thing, drill pilot holes, install the screws, and then repeat the process for the latch on the front of the box. And finishing up the hardware completes this project. I really like the way this box turned out. I love the look of the finger joints with the sapelli wood, and the antique brass hardware makes it look really great. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please consider giving me a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.